The first thing I felt when I opened my eyes wasn't pain, it was confusion. The cold beeping of a heart monitor echoed around me, and the sterile air of the hospital stung my throat. My abdomen ached in a way that was sharper, deeper than the appendicitis I thought I had. I had gone into surgery expecting nothing more than a routine procedure and the story about terrible hospital food. But lying under fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and sickly, I sensed that something was terribly wrong. When the nurse entered, her name tag read Nia. Her eyes unsettled me more than the pain. She checked my IV, glanced at the monitor, then at the door, as if afraid of being overheard. Her voice dropped to a whisper when I told her where it hurt. "Didn't they tell you about the second procedure?" she asked. My chest tightened. I rasped, "What second procedure?" She bit her lip, leaned close, and whispered words that shattered me. "Your husband signed the authorization. While you were under anesthesia, they performed a tubal ligation." Sterilization. The world tilted. My husband Darian had not just accompanied me to the hospital, he had stolen my future while I lay unconscious, trusting him. I remembered our anniversary only a week earlier, candlelight flickering as we laughed about baby names. I had spoken of turning the study into a nursery. He had kissed my hand and promised, all in good time. Every smile, every tender word now felt like poison. When the surgeon finally arrived, his arrogance was as sharp as his scalpel. "It was a preventative measure," he said, barely glancing at me. "Your husband reported a history of issues. We resolved them to save you stress later." His condescension made me tremble with rage. "You didn't have my consent," I told him. He dismissed me with a wave. "We had your husband's consent. Everything is in order." And just like that, he left, reducing the theft of my motherhood to paperwork. Darian appeared hours later with tulips, my favorite flowers, smiling as if nothing had happened. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned away. "Why did you do it?" I whispered. His smile faltered, then returned, dripping with manipulation. "You're confused, my love. The anesthesia is making you sensitive." He insisted that I had once confessed to being afraid of pregnancy, that he had saved me from myself. Gaslighting so smooth it might have worked, if not for the memory of those fertility brochures I had shared with my best friend Sasha only weeks earlier. I ordered him out. He left with a sigh, muttering that we would talk when I was rational. The moment the door closed, I called Sasha, choking on tears. "He sterilized me," I confessed. Her silence was heavy before it exploded into fury. "That son of a... Amara, listen to me. You are not crazy. We talked about baby names 3 weeks ago. I still have the messages. He is lying, and we're going to make him pay." Her words steadied me. For the first time since waking up, I believed I wasn't alone. At home, the penthouse that once felt like a sanctuary became a gilded cage. Darian hovered with cups of tea and practiced tenderness, but the nausea inside me was not from surgery. It was from his betrayal. On Sasha's advice, I played along. I apologized, feigned confusion, and told him he was right. His relief was almost grotesque, proof of his arrogance. That night, as he slept peacefully, I locked myself in the guest bathroom and let the hot shower mask my sobs. I mourned children who would never exist, mornings that would never come, laughter that would never fill our halls. But in the steam and grief, something shifted. The tears hardened into anger. He thought I would break. He thought I would accept his version of reality. He had underestimated me. The next morning, when Darian left for work, I opened his laptop. My heart pounded as I guessed his password. Caramel Princess 2743, an inside joke he had once made about a friend's dog. The screen unlocked. My hand shook as I searched through folders until I found one labeled Project G. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. a transfer of $25,000 to a company owned by Dr. Sterling, the surgeon who had cut into me. And photos, dozens of them, of Darian with another woman, Gina, a glamorous young designer I had met at social events, dinner dates, yacht trips, vacations. Not just an affair, an entire life. But it was the contracts that revealed the true scope of his betrayal. Gina had transferred over $1 million into a shell company Darian controlled, Horizons Development, LLC. It existed only on paper, its sole legal agent, Darian Jones. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator, preparing to drain his mistress of her fortune, just as he had drained me of my future. I sent everything to Sasha, and minutes later, she called back with icy clarity. This isn't just infidelity, Amara. This is fraud. And he left a trail. He sterilized you, and he's setting her up to lose everything. But he didn't count on you finding it first. Now you have the weapon. Her words lit a fire in me. Darian thought he had stolen all my power, but he had handed me the perfect tool for revenge, and I knew exactly how to use it. She agreed to meet me. I told myself this was madness, sitting across from the woman who had slept with my husband, asking her to join a conspiracy against the man she loved, but logic beat panic. Gina arrived at 4 p.m. on a dot at the Maison in Soho, sunglasses hiding eyes that few people could read. Up close, she was even more striking, poised, polished, the kind of beauty the tabloids call effortless. She perched as if the world belonged to her and waited while I slid a folder across the table like an accusation with a signature. She opened it with a practiced hand, and the first thing to hit her was the copy of my surgical consent form. Her face tightened as she read the forged signature and the notation from Dr. Sterling. For a moment, she looked blank, then furious. I watched the denial shatter in slow motion, replaced by a raw, terrible clarity. The papers with the Horizons Development Certificate and her $1,200,000 transfer, written out, labeled, impossible to miss, were next. The wind seemed to suck out of the room when she saw her own name tied to the shell company, whose address was a P.O. box and whose only purpose was to disguise the flow of cash into Darian's private accounts. When the first sob escaped her, it surprised me. Not because she cried, but because the tears were not for the money. They were for the betrayal. She had been set up, used as an author of the lie, a walking exhibit in his plan. It was then, in that quiet corner with two women who had been deceived by the same man, that something surrendered between us. There was no sympathy for Darian, only a shared alarm and a new, merciless focus. Sasha's voice in my ear had predicted this ugliness. She called it a weapon. And Gina saw it too. She sat back, composed, and asked the single question that mattered. What do you want me to do? We spent the next 48 hours building a sting around his triumph. Gina brought access to bank documents she had never looked through closely. I brought the forensic patience of an architect, trained to see structure and weakness. Sasha rounded up a small legal team she knew would move fast, a notary, a forensic accountant, and a paralegal who loved deadlines. We drafted affidavits, photocopied every damning page, and arranged for a notary to be on standby at 3 p.m. the night of Darian's big launch. It would be his coronation. Horizons Miami, the glossy project he had spent months touting in glossy magazines and cocktail conversations. If he could close that deal in front of the right people, his career would become bulletproof. The plan was to make the money he needed vanish in public, to turn his liquidity into an illusion on a giant screen, and to let the room decide he was bankrupt in front of his peers. Public humiliation would be his ruin. Law and shame would finish him. We rehearsed our moves like stage actors. Sasha parked in a suite at the St. Regis with enough bandwidth to crash any digital feed. The notary practiced the exact phrasing for freezing an account under pending fraud investigation. The forensic accountant stood by to pronounce the balance frozen and explain the legal mechanics if anyone asked. Gina agreed to walk the room with me as his mistress, but to slide away at a signal and let the document speak. I swallowed the bile that rose when I imagined her by his side, smiling for cameras, knowing the photos would later be evidence. But revenge required theater. Truth demanded spectacle. I had chosen the stage. On the night of the launch, the St. Regis ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and egos. Men in tuxedos smoothed pocket squares. Women adjusted necklaces with steady hands. Darian moved through it all with the practiced charm of a performer who had convinced himself of his own myth. He climbed the stage to thunderous applause and spoke of trust, of partnerships, of vision. He gestured toward the LED screen, promising transparency and immediate transfer confirmations. That was the moment Sasha's team hit the keys in their suite. I stood at the back, heart slamming against my ribs, feeling the old fear and a new, cold control. Gina and I walked down the central aisle together, our heels a metronome, our faces composed. People glanced up at us, curious. Some whispered. I felt 100 eyes searching for scandal and found satisfaction in every startled look. When we reached the foot of the stage, the LED flickered once, and then the bank confirmation that Darian expected to see never appeared. Instead, a screenshot of Horizon's Development's online account filled the screen. The $1,200,000 balance, and stamped across it in bold red letters, "Account frozen, pending fraud investigation." The room made a sound like the intake of 1,000 breaths. Darian's smile collapsed into a mask. He turned toward the tech desk, panic breaking through, and at that exact instant, 2 men in plain suit strode down the aisle with envelopes in their hands and court-issue documents. They stopped at the edge of the stage and announced, calm and loud, so every microphone would catch it, that Darian Jones was being served with a civil complaint for fraud and a criminal complaint alleging bribery and medical malfeasance. The cameras pivoted. The photographers were already on the story. The conversation that had been his to command died mid-phrase. I felt no triumph in that initial shock. Only a steady, cold satisfaction that the truth could no longer be dressed as invention. The social media feeds ignited within minutes, and the scandal spread faster than any press release. I watched Darian's eyes search the room for an ally and find none. He had built his life from other people's trust, and our humiliation unraveled it in front of the very people whose trust he had betrayed. This was not yet the end. It was the moment his facade began to crack in public view, and for the first time since the hospital bed, I breathed without the hot panic of betrayal coiling my throat. Darian's downfall didn't stop at that ballroom. The scandal spread like wildfire, feeding a public that loved nothing more than watching a golden boy shatter into dust. Within hours, news outlets had plastered screenshots of the frozen account across their websites. Headlines screamed betrayal, fraud, sterilization without consent. By the next morning, his face was everywhere, not as a visionary real estate mogul, but as a predator in an expensive suit. Horizon's Miami collapsed in an instant. The international consortium that had once courted him released a statement disavowing any partnership with the man under criminal investigation. His own firm severed ties, launching an audit that uncovered more questionable transfers. Business allies went silent. The calls he once fielded with smug confidence now came from lawyers and reporters, not partners and investors. For me, the days after the reveal were a whirlwind of both liberation and fear. I had expected to feel relief, but it was more complicated than that. I was free of his manipulation, yes, but I was also standing in the ruins of a life I had built with him. Every corner of our penthouse whispered memories, some real, most now poisoned. I packed boxes in silence, moving with steady hands even as my chest burned with grief. I sold the apartment within weeks. It had been a fortress turned into a cage, and I needed a new start. Gina surprised me. At first I thought she would retreat into her own pain and leave me to fight alone, but instead she called me 2 days after the ballroom and said she was ready to file her complaint formally. Together we met with prosecutors, handing over everything, screenshots, bank transfers, Sterling's bribe. Gina's testimony was sharp, clear, furious. She admitted her shame, but she also made sure every word pinned Darian deeper into the corner he had built for himself. Watching her speak, I realized that the mistress I once despised had become something else entirely, an ally, maybe even a friend, forged in the fire of betrayal. Dr. Sterling fell almost as quickly as Darian. The medical board stripped him of his license after Sasha presented the proof of the illegal tubal ligation. He sat in silence as his legacy disintegrated, no longer the untouchable silver-haired surgeon of New York's elite, but a disgraced man, facing prison for mutilating women without their consent. When I read the news of his indictment, I didn't feel pity. I felt the grim satisfaction of knowing that the system could sometimes, against all odds, hold men like him accountable. The civil lawsuit moved faster than I expected. Darian's lawyers reached out with settlement offers, all dressed in legal jargon, all attempts to buy my silence. $100,000, then $500,000, then the full half of his remaining shares. Each time I gave the same answer, no. There wasn't enough money in the world to restore what he had stolen from me. My refusal became part of the story, picked up by the press. They painted me as the woman who chose justice over wealth, though the truth was simpler. I wanted him to face consequences that couldn't be calculated on a balance sheet. His conviction came nearly a year later. The fraud charges stuck, the medical conspiracy sealed the case. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. I sat in the courtroom as the gavel came down, watching Darian's shoulders slump under the weight of his own arrogance. He tried to look back at me once, as if expecting some flicker of the woman who used to adore him. But I offered him nothing. Not hatred, not forgiveness, just silence. He had taken enough of me already. Life after Darian was quieter, though not easier. I funneled the money from the civil judgment into something that mattered, the Your Decision Foundation, a center in Chicago for women whose choices had been stolen by others. We offered free legal aid, therapy, and financial advice. Designing the space myself felt symbolic. Glass walls for transparency, open rooms for community, colors that felt alive instead of sterile. Each woman who walked through the door reminded me that my pain could build something that mattered. Gina surprised me again with her own act of closure. She donated $250,000 to the foundation in my name, telling the press it was her way of honoring strength she hadn't known she possessed until she met me. For once, I didn't feel bitterness toward her. Instead, I saw the strange beauty of two women, once rivals, now united by the lesson of survival. Some nights, the scar on my abdomen aches, and I remember the future that was stolen, the children I'll never have, the laughter that will never echo in my home. But I no longer cry for that loss. I've learned that grief can coexist with growth, that scars don't erase the possibility of peace. My life looks different than I imagined, but it is mine again. Wholly and irrevocably mine. They say revenge doesn't bring peace. And maybe they're right. What brought me peace wasn't the sight of Darian in handcuffs or Sterling disgraced, though those moments mattered. What healed me was building something from the ashes, creating a place where women like me could walk in broken and walk out believing again in their own strength. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt powerless in the face of someone else's choices, know this: you are not alone, and you are not finished. You have more strength than you think. And sometimes the best justice is ensuring that those who tried to break you can never hurt anyone else again. Thank you for staying with me through my story. If it moved you, please like this video, share it with others who may need it, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and truth. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my place?